Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Reflection, where we explore the Qur'an through the lens of Tafsir al-Mīzān and where faith is restored to clarity, trust and moral seriousness. There are a few passages in the Qur'an that trouble the human conscience more than this one. How can finite actions lead to consequences without end? How can divine mercy coexist without enduring punishment? And what does it mean to say that hell is not merely a place, but a reality that the soul eventually encounters? In the previous episode, we reflected on prophetic infallibility, on why divine guidance must be reliable and safe to follow. In this episode, we turn to the other side of that truth. What happens when guidance is persistently rejected, but as a settled way of being? The Quran introduces this reality with sobering clarity. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah number 2, verse 167, وَمَا هُمْ بِخَارِجِينَ مِنَ النَّارِ. They will not come forth from the fire. This verse does not speak in the language of anger. It speaks in the language of consequence. It is not describing divine rage. It is describing moral finality. It is telling us that some paths, if walked long enough, become destinations. In this episode of Reflection, we will explore why the Quran speaks of enduring punishment, why hell is described as consequence, not arbitrary decree, how repeated choices shape the soul's final condition, and how divine justice and mercy remains perfectly balanced. Take a moment and reflect. Do you focus more on isolated mistakes or on the kind of person you are slowly becoming? Now that we have framed the question, we need to face the central discomfort directly. Why does the idea of eternal punishment feel so troubling to the human conscience? Tafsir al-Mīzān begins addressing this discomfort by correcting a hidden assumption. The assumption is this: that deeds are isolated events, that a sin is something you did once and then it passed and then it disappeared. But the Quran does not view human action this way, and neither does al-Mīzān. The Quran treats deeds as formative forces. They do not merely happen. They shape, they leave traces, they carve paths in the soul. And character is not something you switch off. It is what you are. This is why al-Mīzān reframes the question. It is not how long did the action last? It is what did the action produce in the soul. Because some actions are not just events, they are seeds. And once a soul has built a home in rejection, truth begins to feel foreign. Repentance begins to feel humiliating. Humility begins to feel unbearable. And return begins to feel impossible. So eternity in punishment is not presented as revenge. It is presented as revelation. The unveiling of what the soul has patiently made of itself. Hell in this light is not an endless response to a short mistake. It is the endurance of a final condition, a soul that has become fixed, a heart that no longer turns, a conscience that no longer responds. And that is what makes this subject frightening. Not because Allah is harsh, but because the human being is capable of becoming sealed. That is the moral danger the Quran is warning us about. Take a moment and reflect. When a choice is repeated often enough, does it remain something you do, or does it slowly become part of who you are? If eternity is connected to what the soul becomes, then the next question is unavoidable. What exactly is punishment? Is it something Allah decides to impose from the outside? Or is it something the soul encounters from within? This is where Tafsir al-Mīzān makes one of its most important clarifications. ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāʻī explains that hell is not primarily an externally imposed sentence. It is not Allah suddenly choosing to punish. Rather, it is the manifestation of the soul's inner reality once all veils are removed. The hereafter is the world of disclosure, the world where nothing remains hidden, not from others, not even from oneself. The Quran gives us a powerful image of this unveiling in Surah An-Nur, that is Surah number 24, verse 39. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَعْمَالَهُمْ كَسَرَابٍ بِقِيعَةٍ يَحْسَبُهُ الظَّمْآنُ مَاءً حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءَهُ لَمْ يَجِدْهُ شَيْئًا. As for those who who disbelieve, their deeds are like a mirage in a desert. The thirsty one thinks it's water until he comes to it and finds nothing. This image is devastating. It describes a soul arriving with confidence only to discover that it was chasing illusion. What once felt meaningful dissolves. What once felt like truth turns out to be self-deception. And in that moment, punishment is not Allah becoming harsh. Punishment is reality being revealed. It is Allah allowing the soul to see itself without distortion. And the hereafter is where truth becomes unavoidable. Al-Mīzān emphasizes this point. Hell is not primarily something done to the soul. It is something disclosed to the soul. A soul built on arrogance encounters arrogance. A soul built on cruelty encounters cruelty. A soul built on denial encounters denial. Not symbolically, existentially. This is why the Qur'an speaks of deeds becoming experience, of actions returning as realities, of inner states turning into environments. So punishment is not arbitrary. It is coherent. It follows moral law. Moral laws govern souls. And when those laws are ignored long enough, their consequences become unavoidable. This is why hell is described as a meeting, an encounter, a facing, not merely a sentence. Take a moment and reflect. If every veil were lifted today and you had to meet your inner reality without excuses, what part of yourself would you feel most exposed? Once we understand that punishment is the unveiling of inner reality, a deeper question emerges. How does a soul reach that state in the first place? How does a human being become someone for whom truth feels unbearable and return feels impossible? Tafsir al-Mizan answers this with a simple but unsettling principle. The soul becomes what it repeatedly chooses, because repetition does not merely increase a sin, it reshapes the self. But persistent choices do something far more dangerous. They form disposition, they build character, they create identity. Over time, what begins as a voluntary act becomes an internal habit. Then the tendency becomes a moral personality. And once personality is formed, it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like who I am. This is why the Quran speaks about human striving in such absolute terms in Surah An-Najm, Surah number 53, verse 39. وَأَنْ لَيْسَ لِلْإِنسَانِ إِلَّا مَا سَعَى. A human being shall have nothing except what he strives for. This verse is not only about reward, it's about formation. It tells you, you will live with what you pursue. You will become what you invest in. You will inhabit what you repeatedly choose. Al-Mīzān explains that when a person persists in rejecting truth, something very subtle happens. The heart begins to adapt, the conscience weakens, and the resistance fades. And this is when the Quran speaks of hearts becoming sealed. But because the human being can persist in corruption until the heart no longer responds, until light feels painful, until guidance feels offensive, until truth feels threatening. At that point, punishment is not for a mistake, it is for a state, a settled condition, a soul that has made rejection its home. That is why hell is not infinite punishment for finite sins. It is the endurance of a soul that no longer wants transformation, a soul that has defended itself against guidance until guidance feels impossible. And this is what makes the doctrine terrifying. Not because Allah is cruel, but because the self is capable of becoming locked from within. Take a moment and reflect. Which repeated choices in your life right now are quietly shaping the person you are becoming? Up to this point, we've spoken about how the soul forms, how character becomes fixed, and how a settled inner state generates its own reality. And now, a natural concern rises in the heart. If this is how punishment works, if it flows from what the soul becomes, then where is mercy? Does this understanding leave any space for compassion? Does it make Allah a appear distant? Does it turn judgment into something cold and mechanical? The answer of the Qur'an and of al-Mīzān is clear. Absolutely not. Mercy is present at every stage of the journey. This is why the Qur'an constantly presents Allah as Al-Rahman and Al-Rahim, the all-merciful, the especially merciful. But mercy in Islam is not denial of reality. Mercy is not pretending the choices do not matter. Mercy is not erasing consequences while leaving the soul unchanged. Mercy is offering transformation over and over. What al-Mīzān explains is this: as long as a person remains capable of turning back, as long as humility is still possible, as long as remorse is still alive, as long as truth is still welcome, divine mercy remains open. But mercy does not force itself upon a soul that persistently refuses it, because forced goodness is not goodness. Forced humility is not humility. Allah does not save people by violating their inner reality. He saves them by inviting them to change it. This is why the Qur'an says in Surah Nisa, Surah number 4, verse number 40, Inna Allah la yadhlimu mithqala dharrah. Indeed, Allah does not wrong even the weight of an atom. There is no injustice here, no arbitrariness, no cruelty, only coherence. What you become is what you encounter. And Imam Ali alayhi salam captured this reality with striking clarity. Innama hiya a'malukum turaddu ilaykum. It is only your deeds that are returned to you. Not revenge, not humiliation, not divine anger. Return. You meet yourself. So hell is not something done to the soul. It is something the soul arrives at. It is what remains when every excuse falls away, when every illusion collapses, when every self-deception dissolves. And this is why eternal punishment is not the opposite of mercy. It is what remains after mercy has been persistently refused, after guidance has been ignored, and after truth has been closed out. Not once, not accidentally, not in weakness, but as a settled orientation of life. Pause for a moment. Do you see divine mercy mainly as something that excuses failure, or as something that invites real transformation? Up to this point, we've spoken about how the soul forms, how character becomes fixed, and how mercy remains open as long as return is possible. But now, another concern naturally arises. What about people who did not know? What about those who grew up in confusion, in distorted religious environments, in hardship, in ignorance, in places where guidance was hidden, misrepresented, or even absent? Are they judged in the same way? Are they held to the same standard? The Qur'an and Tafsir al-Mīzān answer this with great care. Absolutely not. Judgment is never blind. Allah does not judge people by abstract ideals. He judges them by their actual capacity, by what they knew, by what they were exposed to, by what they were capable of understanding, by what opportunities they truly had. This is why the Qur'an never presents accountability as mechanical. It is personal, it's contextual, it is precise. And Allah sees what no human judge can see. The inner struggle, the sincere confusion, the quiet effort, the hidden sincerity, and the unseen obstacles. The Qur'an reminds us of this balance in Surah Al-Isra, Surah number 17, verse number 19 and 20. وَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْآخِرَةَ وَسَعَ لَهَا سَعْيَهَا وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَأُولَٰئِكَ كَانَ سَعْيُهُمْ مَشْكُورًا كُلًّا نَمِدُّ هَؤُلَاءِ وَهَؤُلَاءِ مِنْ عَطَاءِ رَبِّكَ وَمَا كَانَ عَطَاؤُهُ رَبِّكَ مَحْظُورًا. Whoever desires the hereafter and strives for it as it deserves while being a believer, their striving is gratefully acknowledged. To all these and those we extend from the bounty of your Lord, and the bounty of your Lord is never withheld. Notice what this verse emphasizes: not perfection, striving, sincere effort, direction of the heart. Allah does not demand flawless performance. He looks at honest orientation, and this is why eternal punishment is never described in the Qur'an as a punishment for ignorance. It is always connected to knowing rejection, to deliberate closing, to persistent refusal, to choosing darkness while recognizing light. Imam Jafar as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu explained this with great clarity. Inna nara liman aghlaqa bab at-tawbati ala nafsihi. The fire is for the one who has closed the door of repentance upon himself. Notice the wording: not for the one who made mistakes, not for the one who struggled, not for the one who failed, but for the one who closed the door from inside, who refused return, who silenced conscience, who hardened the heart, who no longer wanted light. So divine judgment is not harsh. It is accurate. It is measured. It is just. No soul is wronged. No effort is ignored. No sincere struggle is wasted. And this is why al-Mīzān insists that hell is never a punishment for weakness. It is the end state of deliberate spiritual refusal. Pause for a moment. When you fall short, do you still keep the door of return open in your heart? A final question remains. What is this knowledge meant to do to us now? The Qur'an does not speak about the hereafter to paralyze the believer. It speaks about the hereafter to awaken seriousness, to restore moral clarity, to remind us that life is not random, that choices are not disposable, that habits are not harmless, that inner states matter. Every orientation of the heart leaves a trace. Every repeated choice shapes perception. Every moral direction slowly builds a future reality. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, gradually, almost invisibly, before return becomes difficult. When you understand health through Tafsir al-Mīzān, it no longer appears as a tool of control. It appears as a mirror. It shows the soul what it has patiently made of itself, and paradise does the same. It reveals the beauty of a heart that kept choosing sincerity, that kept returning, that kept humbling itself, that kept correcting course. So eternity is not something distant. It is being built now, in thoughts, in private choices, in moments no one sees. This is why the believer lives with awareness, not fear, with seriousness, not despair, with hope, not complacency, because every day is still open. Every heart can still soften. Every direction can still change, as long as return is desired. Pause for a moment. Are your daily choices quietly moving you closer to Allah, or slowly drifting you away? Before we move to our final reflections, let us step back for a moment, not to debate theology, not to revisit arguments, but to gather what this journey has shown us about the soul, responsibility, and return. Eternal punishment reflects a permanent spiritual state, not arbitrary vengeance. Repeated choices shape character, and character shapes eternal experience. Divine mercy remains open, as long as the heart remains open to return. Hell is presented in the Qur'an as consequence and unveiling, not injustice, and every day of life remains an opportunity for correction, humility, and renewal. In the next episode of Reflection, we will turn to a foundational question: the immateriality of the soul. What kind of reality is the soul? Why does it survive the body? And how does its nature explain accountability, memory, and moral continuity? Thank you for reflecting with me on this difficult and important subject. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, give us a thumbs up, and share this episode broadly. Until next week, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.